Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Smaulgld Subscribers Sound Off. Today we have with us Kevin Hicks, who is a economic journalist. Kevin, how you doing today?
Doing fine.
Excellent, excellent. And Kevin, how long have you been a Smaulgld subscriber, if not a subscriber? How long have you been following the Smaulgld content?
I've been following since early December, and I've been actually subscribed since about a month ago, if not a couple weeks, close to a month.
Well, delighted to have you. Um, Kevin, can you give us some background on how you came about following the economy through your role as a journalist and the gold and silver markets?
It's just trying to pretty much make sense of the economical downfall that was going on around me, as far as people not being able to get jobs yet having certification to do so, and as well as understanding the lingo that's used inside most business circles, as far as time, labor cost, and then it kind of pushed me into understanding what companies deal with, and that kind of pushed me into understanding the manipulation of the economy and how like it's just a perpetual thing almost, as if it's meant not to be solved.
Now, here's a question for you, Kevin. You started out your first kind of understanding or peeking into this, and it sounds like you almost immediately came upon kind of what you see as manipulation and shenanigans. Can you explain how quickly you learned that once you started to peek under the covers of the economy and try to make understanding of it?
Well, it was pretty much first, I ain't gonna lie, I'm not no prodigy at the start. I had to go through my own cognitive dissonance and realizing that not everything that was presented me is the legitimate truth. So first and foremost, I'm a person of truth. So I'm a person not like being lied to. And I'm a person, if I'm going to play the game that's been given to me, then at least stay by the rules that you're presenting us. And then so it's just realizing that within like the economy reasons, the banking, learning about the money laundering inside certain areas as far as charities, if not learning about lobbying. It just really got me to try to understand who are those that's pushing the pawns across the board, if that makes sense.
And yes, it does. And when you started this investigation, what were your media sources?
Immediate sources. I worked with a couple close friends, as far as personal friends in different countries, as far as Pascal is living in Germany. Chris Forte, who's been a long close friend of mine, who's always been there next to me. Like once I started noticing these things and I would talk about it, sometimes you get shunned about it from society because of that normalcy bias that you just broke from. So it kind of irritates you to a point. But after a while, you start to like go across the web and you start to come across certain YouTube channels, if not other web channels. And then you start to meet people like yourself. First and foremost, I have highly respect for you. I met people like Greg Manarino, Ken Shorgen. When I started to get into cryptocurrency, which is another thing that I've started to go into as I follow the dollar, as they say.
Hmm.
Um, I started to get into Tommy from Tommy World Power and Crypto Portfolio, who also speak of a new bubble that's arising as far as the crypto background.
Okay, so it sounds like you looked at the economy, you made what many intelligent people do, a determination that it's definitely not on the up and up, that there's manipulation, that there's obfuscation, there's a.
Especially, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I think you understand what I'm
Especially,
saying.
especially after you see president after president after president performing the same policy, foreign and at home. And of course, they give that sweet narrative, but it's like, all right, if he's not saying what he means and doing what he says, then what's really going on? And then, like, you would see them promise something like with every president, as far as before Bush to Obama to Trump. I'm not speaking on negatively on any of those, but I'm just saying, like, you'll hear something during an election, and then you'll start to see the same pattern afterwards, as far as the attacks and missiles on Syria or the economic missile deals or arms deals with Saudi Arabia, which I'm not going to shun America for doing it because Duterte and Putin is doing the same thing.
Okay,
They have
so,
to, oh,
so
yeah.
so we talked about substitution. I want to get into that discussion. Uh, it sounds like the manipulation occurs through a substitution of a different reality. Can you kind of talk about what you mean by, where they historically they seem to have done this? Can you give us some examples through history of how the powers that be, so to speak, substitute one reality for the other, and then bring that into the modern day. Because I think you're talking about the presidents. It sounds like they tell you one thing, they give you a nice vision, and then if you look at what they're actually doing, you're saying they're doing the same thing. And isn't that kind of historical pattern that goes on, Kevin?
Yes, sir. Like even with Rome in the Denari, how it was mainly silver and then it slowly to lose its silver value until it was like what 3%, 1% silver. It's the same thing with the dollar. Like ever since the institution of the Federal Reserve, it has lost 97% of its value. And
But do they
it was
tell you that as they go?
it was brought on by different things as far as multiple stages of devaluation, including the Bretton Woods, and then the eventual complete abandonment of the gold value standard itself under Nixon. And then since 1971, there has always been a marked increase in the number of magnitude and financial crises around the world. And it's the same thing that happened during the fall of Rome, like from decadence unto, because they always say there are 7 stages of empire. And during the decrease inside the silver, it was slowly losing its age of decadence. And then even when I won't get on false flags and terrorism at this moment. We'll stay on economy reasons. But just a little tidbit note. Rome, if you look it up, was involved in how allowing its soldiers to dress up as, bad people, go around sabotaging and try to pass further laws to take away freedom from the people. So it always shows a decline inside society whenever there's this thing going on.
I agree. Now, here's the thing. I've studied the history of Rome, and one of the things that I noticed, and I don't know if it's because this is how things happened back then, and the pace was slower, but excuse me. I think if you were living in Rome at the time, in the year 150, 180, 190, whatever it was, after in the current modern era, you didn't notice the decline because the decline took. If you think about Rome falling, it finally fell in 476, at least the western portion of the empire. But
When the Visigoths captured it.
yeah, but I think in the denarius too, they didn't take the denarius from 98% to 3% in 2 years. That happened over a course of over a century.
Yeah, they started rapidly increasing their debt to finance wars.
Right, and
And
that's like they clip the coins in order to do it. But they do get away with it, and they get away with it for a long time, longer than people think.
yes,
And and what do you think is happening right now? I mean, since 2009, you have the stock market going up, you have increase in debt, and unless you're paying attention, you don't really seem to notice that it's happening. Now, how long can they go on with this kind of illusion that they've created wealth when they really haven't created wealth? They've just borrowed money to buy wealth, so to speak. But now that at some point they're going to have to pay it back.
yeah, and that goes into the derivatives of Deutsche Bank and things. But it mainly comes down to a fact of not how long they can do it, but how long the people will allow it, because it's becoming a known thing that the banks are manipulating. But it's the fact that how many people are willing to leave the comfort zone, because to get rid of a bank, it means removing a large infrastructure of the government.
Correct. And the thing also is, you say a lot of people are aware of it, but are
Yes, sir.
people
There's
politicians and people are generally not willing to full scale do away with a system that is in some respects supporting hundreds of millions of people. And so the question is, what happens? Like, let's say, okay, you don't like the system that's set up. I don't like the system that's set up with this credit. But what could you actually do to change it such that the impact is not so dramatic that you have Mad Max?
And that's very true. Like the only, and I've thought of many ways, don't lie, from the most physical way down to the most mental way. And the only logical way that I can think of is just replacing those eventually in power of those positions, either by its removal by legal rights, or if it's just trying to help groom someone to take over that seat, if not you yourself.
But let's talk about legal.
Because,
Let's talk about legal because you mentioned the president is the same every year. So
yes, sir.
legally means what? Elections?
If it's not by elections, starting small in the businesses, because we already know our government is ran by corporations. They're ran by families with money. Even for example, the Federal Reserve, you can already look up a list of names and see who owns that,
Right.
and you'll see that we pretty much owned by the British Crown. I'm not going to, yeah.
No, I know we don't have to get into the details. I think the people
Yes, sir. I'm not,
they either know the details or they're aware that there are details. But the fact is that what you're saying is there's an oligopoly. There's
yes,
oligarchs
sir.
running the countries internationally and also at a national level, and that's always been the case, though, hasn't it?
It really has always been the case, and then sometimes you'll notice that small mishap in history where one of them get knocked off, or sometimes there is a position where they succeed against the bankers and the family. Say, for instance, Andrew Jackson.
Correct.
He succeeded during his presidency. It's just the fact that after him, you can't really say much for those. It's just trying to reclaim that. How much are you willing to push against it? Because we've already seen what they're willing to do to keep what they have in place.
Correct. Now, let me ask you about Andrew Jackson. Do you think Andrew Jackson was following a populist route, or do you think that was his own personal view that he took upon himself to actually go and do? Because I think if you don't have, I don't think we have in the United States a populist. I mean, we had the End the Fed movement for, I don't know, for a few years, but I don't think it's that strong anymore. And I don't think Donald Trump really gives a hoot about it either. So do you think it was Andrew Jackson? I don't know the answer to this. Was Andrew Jackson driven by, I know he personally did not like the bank, but were the people aware enough that they were supporting his efforts against the national bank?
I think they were aware he was given two terms, and on top of that, it's even if he wasn't 100% doing it for the people, it was a self-driven thing that he wanted to do that was backed by the people with like interest.
Hmm.
Like for instance, Donald Trump, you can't really tell where he stands because
Correct.
he'll say great things about Andrew Jackson. He acknowledges some things because we didn't heard his speeches he didn't gave before becoming president. And it's just the fact that once he became president, we start to see the same things that we would see by a person lobbying for banks. And his kids does have connections to Deutsche Banks, if it be through debt or whatever it may be.
Do you think that that's just politics when the presidents change their stance, or do you think they kind of get into power because they're kind of selected, not elected, and when they're there, they kind of get told what to do?
There are presidents that have been selected. For example, George Washington. It's a known thing that he was a what is it called? Mason. His battle records as far as when he was leading isn't the
Hmm.
best. There were actually better than him. But it's the fact,
You mean there were better generals?
yes, sir.
Well, the one thing they say about George Washington, however, though, if is that he did not, when he became elected president, he did not choose to become king. He did not choose to stay on for two terms. But one thing that he did do, which was interesting, he had Andrew Hamilton in his cabinet, and Andrew Hamilton supposedly convinced him, if George Washington wasn't interested in doing it himself, to kind of go and attack the people who weren't paying their whiskey taxes, kind of like a internal invasion. So it is interesting, you're taught that George Washington's the father of our country. I don't know much about the Masonic background, but
Yes, sir.
those are the types of things you don't learn, and they don't want you to know that. And they'll tell you stories about Lincoln, how he was a fan of ending slavery, when that's not really true. That's not that.
Exactly, because honestly, the emancipation just weakened the voting power of the South. And on top of,
Absolutely, yes.
if it was to about free slaves, why would you make a law right after telling slaves that they can't read or write, and any white person teaching them would get a $500 fine and time in jail?
Well, what bothers me about the Emancipation Proclamation is, when did it happen? 1864. If Abe Lincoln was so against ending slavery, he would have proclaimed that when he first got elected president, and he would have proclaimed it not just for the southern states, but for the whole country. And he didn't do it. He only had the Emancipation Proclamation for the countries, the states that were in rebellion, which he had no jurisdiction over.
Exactly. And
So,
it's just like us going into Syria, like say for instance, I just want to make that example. But that's a fine example you brought up Abraham Lincoln because we can compare him to Andrew Jackson. Abraham Lincoln, he did it based on his popularity votes, if not just trying to get his own personal agenda through. Because yes, he did go against, he said there was two great enemies, the one in front and the one behind. And he did show that he was trying to go against the bank-backed currency, but he did try to put his own currency in the front and try to go off his own agendas. And he wasn't exactly the most honest person. Andrew Jackson, he stuck through and through as if every action he did was for the people,
well,
even after his assassination. I mean, attempted assassination. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he followed. Well, Kevin, you just raised another very interesting point that a lot of people are not aware of. There are people who talk about the Fed and they talk about, the Fed is debt based and we're better off with non debt based. But I think what you were talking about with Lincoln had a thing called the greenbacks.
Yes,
Uh,
sir. The
And,
greenback.
right. And in order to fund the war, he printed money. So I don't know if it's any better if the U.S. Treasury just decides they're going to print money, or they hand
Yeah,
it over to a third party and they issue debt. And isn't it both the same unbacked inflationary type of currency?
exactly. Because it's like Maduro deciding to invent a currency during the Venezuela and things going on right now as far as protesting, etc.
Okay,
You
so
know,
he has a currency that's no better. He just prints it up. If it's not backed by anything, if they don't have much of their gold left, then
just trusting his word.
yeah. So what we're getting at here is that throughout history, you have these actors that say one thing, do another, and then there's an overlay, isn't there? Then history says they rewrite what actually didn't even happen at all. So
The
you get
victors
you
of
get
history.
three different realities: what actually happened, what the guy said he was going to do, and then what history said he did.
Exactly. Just like with Einstein, for example, everybody thought he was a mute for the longest and like was a genius from the start, but he was bad at normal math in high school.
Yes, I heard
And
that. Yes.
yes, sir. But it's just like there's your personal experience, there's those around you, and then there's those that you deal with at a business constant. Just like, for instance, a person that may go to jail, you see a person going to jail, but what's the reason? Was it just over a ticket? Was it recorded as just a ticket, or was it just him going to jail that you only saw?
Well, your
Like,
perception of anyone going to jail, I don't care who you are, is that the person is bad. Unless you know the person already, unless you've got the background, you just hear somebody had been arrested, and your initial reaction is, "Oh, well, they must have done
yeah, I'm
something."
sorry, just being arrested, not going to jail.
Well, both, same thing. I mean, that's a perception. Let's bring this back now. Now
Yes,
that the listeners have a sense of how you analyze things through historic lens and through your perceptions. What do you think of the current state of? We're going to do the gold and silver market, and then we're going to move over and compare it to the crypto markets. Let's start with the gold and silver and the price action in the last few years.
That's been a real interest to me because currently I know about BRICS and how they're doing things as far as China and their consumption of gold and Russia and their consumption of gold lately, and how most of the gold that they've been putting into their government holdings has been mainly gold from their own country.
Correct. The domestic
So,
mining production.
yes, sir. So, with that said, it's pretty much taken away from the gold that's being accessed from the rest of the world from product, what they're putting out. So, we look
Especially since they're number one and two in production.
exactly. So that's the things we have to look at. We don't have to look at their fiat value. We have to look at their asset value.
Okay.
And sometimes they can be manipulated, just like with China building the false cities, et cetera, et cetera.
Is that
I'm
your
sorry.
is that your cue to talk about China?
I'm sorry, that was a phone call.
That's all right. So you were talking about the addition of gold reserves to China and Russia through the domestic supply. That's taking away gold that's available for the rest of the world.
Yes, sir.
But how does that impact the price? Because if that was happening, and if that gold is not coming on the market, and if that gold is staying within those two countries respectively, shouldn't the price rise?
It really depends because at the end of the day, who controls the market that the values are going on to? Because we know at nighttime they say China's the king, and at daytime, you know about the Western countries that are mainly manipulating the markets. As far as I don't know if it's true or not. As far as J.P. Morgan holding a lot of silver in reserve, and I learned recently that they have started getting into the crypto market with their reserves. J.P. Morgan has recently started working with Zcash, which is a cryptocurrency.
Hmm.
Ethereum Classic is being backed by Bank of America currently. And it's just like the money that they've gotten from playing the markets with the gold and silver manipulation and the fiat currency and petrodollar, et cetera, et cetera. They started to take it into the next generation. And it's pretty much kind of a stab in the back because that's the same kind of loophole that people was looking to get from under the pressure of the fiat currency.
Exactly. So let me get this straight. What you think has happened is that they have thoroughly kind of controlled the gold and silver markets through manipulation, irrespective of supply demand dynamics. They've made lots of profit. They've probably accumulated, although we don't have proof on the JP Morgan side, but for their profits, they probably can buy the real assets. And now you're saying they're moving into the crypto space.
Yes, sir.
Hmm.
There are actually news headlines talking about it. There's a web page that you can probably look at called Eth News. It talks about their dealings with certain banks, just like Ripple is dealing. They have a nest egg of a group of banks working with them to start doing, try to bypass the shift system.
Right. Now, I knew about Ripple. I know some of them are backed, but what do you think about Bitcoin, which supposedly isn't infiltrated and isn't owned by, that we know, any large actors that are involved in the banking system?
My thing about this is you can look up Ethereum, you can look up so many other cryptocurrencies, you can even look up regular currencies throughout the world, even holders of some gold and silver. But one thing you can't do about Bitcoin is you can't find a Satoshi Nakamoto. You
Right.
don't know if it's a person or a group. On top of that, the price inflation of Bitcoin either shows that it's a speculation bubble about to burst in the near future, probably either this year or probably some years, who knows? But it's the fact that there are going to be bag holders that are going to lose their houses over it. And it's the fact that Bitcoin has been moved so high that the fact that you can't deny the fact that Wall Street is starting to get involved. Banks are starting to get involved. The government is even starting to get involved. And then they've even coming out on news articles talking about it. I can pull up a couple of them if I have to.
But if
And
the
it's
if the
just like,
banks are getting involved, doesn't that provide some type of underlying support so that the bubble doesn't burst?
will the average house owner be able to afford it? Or will just the investors and banks be able to afford it? Like, how will it help the normal person, even if they are getting involved and the bubble doesn't burst?
Well, it's
Because
the same with the stock market. You're making the exact point that Yellen and Bernanke says the reason they wanted the stock market to go higher, you create a wealth effect, but they're missing the point that most people, especially on the lower economic side, they don't have stocks anyway. And then they say, well, then they
yes,
own
sir.
homes, and it's like, well, you've made the homes too expensive to buy, so they're renting. So you're saying that same dynamic is going to happen in the cryptocurrencies?
Well, as far as the stock markets, it's been made easier for people to access, but at the end of the day, a couple houses in a city isn't going to change the value of a Bitcoin. It's going to take something as far as dumping millions on a buying a large sum, as they call them on Poloniex or Bittrex and the other exchange websites, whales.
So
And
do you see any financial asset or any point of view that can help the average guy or gal if gold and silver and Bitcoin are not it?
yes, like you can go in. I always go into gold and silver because it's been around for thousands of years, if not 5,000 years, and
Hmm.
it's always good as a hedge. And if we do go into a max madness theory, like you will always have that to lean on. It's impossible to get a large amount because I'm sorry, if you try to lug it around, you're probably going to get robbed.
Right, right.
And it's the fact that yes, Bitcoin is good. You can buy a small amounts of it all the way up to the eighth decimal, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that what happens when the system goes down for a bit, or what happens with those households that aren't knowledgeable about investing. When do they know when to buy or sell? Because the reason for Bitcoin increasing is because most people buying are holders, not use actual transaction users.
Oh,
There's some
I,
people that
I
use
agree with
it,
that. I mean,
but
you hear people talking about Bitcoin adoption nonsense. It's
yeah,
Bitcoin hold and hoard and don't let go of it. And when more people want it, it's not available to buy. It's not because people are using it that it's on the way up. But how long can that last? Because if Bitcoin becomes hoard, I think we've seen it. Ethereum, all these other ones, people say, well, I'll go and buy that and I'll hoard that one and drive the price of that up.
because a common sense investor will say, all right, I've got these gains from this Bitcoins. I
Hmm.
see these other coins. I did my research. I know that for this one Bitcoin, I can probably buy 1,000 of those, and then eventually it will rise up to the price of Bitcoin, and I just increase my gains by 1,000 fold. It's eventually
Isn't that kind of a Ponzi scheme mentality though? Just move.
everything's a Ponzi scheme, honestly, when it comes down to an investment world. Like even the way they
It's
got gold and
interesting.
silver, don't get me wrong, because it's on an ETF and then it's traded, it doesn't get attached to the actual value of the metal itself. It gets attached to a speculation. That can always be controlled.
Well, that's true because if you go back to gold and silver, and we see that Westerners chase the price higher. If the price
Yes,
is
sir.
going up, they're going to buy COMEX futures because
And the
it's
China knows when it goes down, that's when you buy it.
exactly. So it's kind of a reverse dynamic. The price goes down, Indians and Chinese buy the physical,
Yes, sir.
and you would think all that buying would drive the price up. It doesn't. It only
It does.
goes up when
You
the
would think that.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, and yeah, you would think that because if Bitcoin acted as such that as what they tried to sell it to us as, it would be attached to something, if not gold, silver, the dollar, something. This shows that when it goes up, it means that something else is going down, or when it goes down, it means that we're gaining financial power, or something in between.
Well, I
But
guess
it's
you
the
could
fact
say
that
you could say that Bitcoin, and I agree with you. I don't care how high it goes. That to me is a fundamental flaw. They say it's not. If there's nothing attached to it, then how do you value it? Well, the way you
exactly.
can value it, however, they can say, is loss of confidence in fiat. So you take this other currency, which is limited. That's one way of valuing it. And the other is simple supply and demand. You convince people that they want it, and no one has it to sell, so the price goes higher. But my big issue with Bitcoin has always been that uh, I like the idea, the original. Do you remember eGold?
Yes, sir.
And
Um,
eGold,
I,
what happened with eGold was it was just like gold money is today. And you had your gold and it was attached and you could trade it. And the government wanted to shut it down. So they knew where the gold was and they were able to confiscate it and shut it down. The advantage to Bitcoin is there's nothing to shut down because it doesn't exist anywhere. There's no asset backing it, so the government can't come and take it. So they view that as a feature, but I view that as, well, if there's nothing to take, well, you're kind of admitting that there's nothing there, but then they say, well, there's this infrastructure and it's the wave of the future. I still don't buy, I get why it's going
honestly,
up,
I
but I
think
don't get it.
blockchain is the wave of the future. It's just the
What is,
fact
well, I'm sorry,
that
what,
Bitcoin
what
is
is,
able to, huh?
what is the wave of the future?
Blockchain itself, the technology behind
Yes.
Bitcoin.
And for what reason?
Huh?
And for what reason
Oh,
is,
security reasons. Mainly because, all right, everybody says that Bitcoin is anonymous. You can't track a person using it, but yes, you can. If it's not by some government official asking for your internet, tracking records or whatever it may be, they can also track it because of how blockchain works. Blockchain uses a system where it makes sure that only one person is holding that one thing. So if it's Bitcoin being traded, one person holding it, it has to identify that person as that one person holding it, so nobody else can say they're holding it, and then that kind of blocks off manipulation and making fraud coins, basically. And then it's an open wide ledger. It's kind of like a super ledger, kind of like how the mafia had their small ledgers of who owned them. It's kind of like an internet version ledger where everybody can see it almost, and it is not just on one computer. It's mainly on part of a network.
right, so it's a public ledger. I do like that. There's also the concept of smart contracts where you basically take the human element out of interpretation. You set up what the proposition is, and when those things get hit, they get hit, and the money either flows or it doesn't flow based on what the contract says how it's supposed to work, not based on a legal interpretation or, like, for example, I think there's a contract you can actually set it up where if you buy something and it stops working, and then the blockchain knows it stopped working, then you don't pay. And those are the types of things where it's automatic. You don't have human interaction. So blockchain, they say, is based on math. That's what they say Bitcoin is backed by, is math, that you can't argue with it, limited edition. So I like the concept. I'm grappling with the idea of lack of intrinsic value. I do believe that the reason money is money is because you actually want the thing. I don't think you want Bitcoin for any reason other than it represents value. But in and of itself, there's nothing you can do with it. You can't eat it, and they say that about gold. But you can use gold or you can use silver in industrial uses. There's people who make a career out of telling you how many things you can do with a piece of silver. But there's not much you can
Yeah,
do
because
with
I know about
with
the base of silver as well. Like, I won't knock Bitcoin as far as its uses. Like, there are some places that use it in transaction levels, but as far as its technological long reach and how far it's been available to the public, you can tell that it's just mainly just gotten by on word alone until recently, where Ethereum comes along and shows this new revolutionized way of using altcoins, and all of a sudden you see Bitcoin suddenly want to burst in to try to like mimic, almost try to take what's already been shown by the world and try to add it to what's already it's already been used as far as word of mouth speculations and things like that. And then like you start to see certain people incorporated, but then you start to wonder why. Why are all these governments and banks slowly starting to try to incorporate it all of a sudden, unless it means they have a large stake in it? Because I'm sorry, like it's kind of like being an insurance salesman. I'm not going to try to sell you insurance unless I'm working for the company itself.
Yeah.
And
Now the thing about Bitcoin though is what I think is they recognize it as a very superior technology, and I think they know they can't co-opt the actual blockchain, but they can create their own blockchains, and they can decide that, let's use our blockchain because blockchain technology, as you say, is imminently traceable. And what I'm concerned about in a cashless society is governments issue blockchain currencies. You have to use it, and then they know every last bit
exactly,
of what you do, and so that's why I'm concerned is the
kind of like
gold.
the healthcare thing.
Well, yes, gold and they know everything about it. Gold and silver were anonymous, and so is cash. But
Exactly.
cryptocurrencies, other than the cryptology in front of it, are not anonymous if it's government issued and they strip that cryptology away from it.
And the closest thing that I can say of the altcoins that's close to anonymous is Monero, first and foremost, which is being like adopted by the East. You got Bitcoin Dark and a couple other altcoins that specialize in trying to be anonymous, but it isn't, say, attached to a blockchain per se. Don't get me wrong, there's a technology mimicking blockchain behind certain things, but they've done it in a way where they're able to transact these things between peer to peer. Kind of like coming out soon is Token. It's an app based, it's a crypto based app which allow people to send Ethereum and probably other cryptocurrency through just Messenger alone.
Hmm.
Like, hey, you're messaging Tommy. Here's 1 year Ethereum. Go use it at the gas station, and it sends it within a minute.
Well, that's an interesting concept. Kevin,
Yes.
before we go, I want to get your another couple of minutes left. I want to get where you think you don't have to make price predictions. You can if you like, on where you think the economy, the gold and silver markets, and the crypto markets are headed over the next couple of years.
Gold and silver, if it can get through its manipulation, I would love to see gold around 8,000, if not way higher, because it's really undervalued. Silver, you can see it mid hundreds, close to 1,000, but that's if it's dealt with from under pressure. Because gold is good for trading and, of course, currency values, and then we've already talked about before how people specialize in telling you about silver and all the wide uses. We're dealing inside of a wartime and an economical crisis right now, so that's double the usage for silver since it's used inside certain burn ointments.
Hmm.
You have people with bullet wounds, bombs, and etc. They use that silver-based ointment, and that just increased the value. That's why silver should be way higher than what it is. Also, it's called the poor man's gold. As far as cryptocurrency, I can see things as Ethereum Classic shooting up because it has a lot of deals going on in it, and also they have a lot of consensus conventions going on right now as far as talking about the future of crypto. There's a lot of pump and dumps that I recommend people avoid. I'm not going to get on a specific name because I hate feeling like I'm targeting any one of them.
Right.
Bitcoin, if it's allowed to keep doing what it does, yes, it will see 4,000 and it just keep rising until somebody checks it or eventually all the whales want to sell out of it.
All right.
Ethereum,
Before you go on to Ethereum, you mentioned Bitcoin. You gave a price target, and that's because it isn't being stopped. But
it isn't.
I want to get you back on gold and silver because you gave very aggressive price targets. But but why if there's still the manipulation? What?
That's if there was no manipulation.
But do you see that happening? Where why would there not be manipulation?
Because then it would become scarce because the actual value of the metal, since the metal was
No,
probably
no,
not where
no. I
they
get
think
that.
it.
But what's
I'm
going to
sorry.
stop the manipulation?
What would stop the manipulation? It's kind of like how the East is currently. I don't know if China's going to continue to manipulate it or not, but I know as far as the East is creating counteractions for every type of economical institute that we have over on our side. Kind of like we got the Financial Reserve. They
Right.
have a counteraction to it. Above all of that is the BSI that handles all types of trades and stuff like that. But it's the fact that if they do move to the SDRR, they slowly start to remove the world currency. I mean, the world reserve currency, which is the dollar. Then we can start to see more countries starting to pull in gold more and silver more. And
Okay,
then,
so it's based on a dollar decline and kind of a change or a reset in the the financial system. Is that it?
yeah, because honestly, I ain't gonna lie. Like the only reason most people in South society is getting a part of gold and silver is because they are aware of what's going on with the dollar, but it's kind of hard to accrue gold and silver as far as like lug it around whenever
Right.
things does expand. So that's why there's been a large boom inside cryptocurrency.
Right, but if we don't have that change, where would you see gold and silver? If we still have the manipulation.
Oh, if we still had a manipulation, it may stay the same. If not, gold rise up to 2,000. Silver rise up into the 30s to 40s, if not 50s,
Yeah,
like
I
before.
agree with that. I think you could still have price appreciation even though you have
Yes, sir.
manipulation. Okay, I'm sorry. Now, before we go, I cut you off before you were going to give your Ethereum, not classic, but Ethereum prediction.
Yeah, Ethereum prediction. Ethereum can hit 500 at the least by September,
Hmm.
or if not, by the end of the year, it can possibly see 1,000 because of a lot of things that's coming in based off Ethereum's blockchain alone. As far as the ERC20 token card, which allows people to use a Visa card that's connected to their cryptocurrency bank accounts and will transact it like it's money on itself. And that will allow people to keep that currency on their card and it can appreciate in value over time, just like allowing it to stay on the stock market, allowing it to stay on the crypto market. I'm sorry. But
So
sure.
that's interesting. Let me just speculate with you before we get off the line here. Now we have gold money,
Hmm.
and
We also
people.
have a trip. I'm sorry.
But what I was going to say about gold money is that's not. It's good that you can use your gold. You have it on a credit card. You can use it, but that doesn't make the price of gold go higher. Because, but what you're saying, and I kind of agree with it, is that if you can put something you know is kind of on the way up, at least temporarily, or maybe for the next few years, like Ethereum, and you can also use it to buy stuff, that's very attractive because that puts you in charge of a deflationary currency where everything for you gets cheaper as you buy it using Ethereum because your currency is rising against the base currency. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes, sir. And there's also a cryptocurrency that's actually backed by gold itself. It's called the Digix, and they also have a sub cryptocurrency called the DigiDAO. And the DigiDAO is mainly a investment currency where people that hold it actually gets percentages of people that buy Digix, the gold backed currency. It's actually attached to the gold's price, and it's based off of a gram of gold price.
Well, that sounds like we have some very interesting times ahead, Kevin, with cryptocurrencies and all the variants. I think even there's even one with under Sharia law where they're going to use some type of blockchain to. I have to research it. Are you aware of that one?
Yes, sir. They plan on using a gold-backed currency as well. I think it's called the e-dinar or something else. I
Hmm.
have to look into that myself. But it's basically because a part of Sharia law institutes that they can't use fiat currency. That's one of the main reasons that government Sharia law. Don't get me wrong, it's crazy stuff. But it's the fact that the only reason the government cares about it because first and foremost, the government don't care about the people as a whole. As far as like, oh, you hurt? I'm sorry, you're gonna have to pay your bill. Um, but it's the fact that one thing that does hurt the government as part of Sharia law is the fact that they have to deal with gold and other things that aren't part of fiat currency. They can't trade with it. That's why you got certain regime changes. That's why you have Gaddafi getting killed off and et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to follow on as the continuing conversation in the future as to how this cryptology impacts us all, as well as continue to follow the gold and silver markets. Kevin, thank you
Yep.
very much for joining us on Small Gold Subscribers Sound Off.
Thank you.